They're the producers of the new documentary film that tells the story of Memphis photographer Ernest Withers and the revelation after his death of his role as an FBI informant. I'm Caleb Suggs, and this is A Conversation with the Picture Taker Filmmakers. I'm Caleb Suggs for WKNO with Bertelsen and Lisa Yasui, the filmmakers behind The Picture Taker, a new film about photographer Ernest Withers and his legacy. It's airing nationally on PBS as a presentation of independent lens. Phil, Lisa, thanks for talking with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so let me start with you, Phil. So, Peabody Award winning, Academy Award winning. Let me ask you, you have a large resume of work that deals with the Black community. You've got Through the Fire with Obama, you've got Hope and Fear with MLK, Who Killed Malcolm X. What kind of brings you to these important historical points when it comes to telling stories about the Black community?
Mainly because I just felt like there were stories that were lesser told, largely misrepresented in some ways, and worth telling. And I'm just a lover of history and a lover of being able to get the story right if given the opportunity. So that's pretty much why these are stories that I've gravitated toward.
And so why Memphis? I know you've touched on that a little bit when making documentation of Martin Luther King, but what kind of brought you to doing more stories that involve like the history that takes place here?
So Memphis has long been a fascination of mine, and the opportunity to come here helps me understand, I think, African American history all the more. And what brought me here originally was my work with Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. And the story of Ida B. Wells, in fact. But when I inherited this story about Mr. Withers, I had an even greater opportunity to come and understand this city on a bluff overlooking the Mississippi, and I've spent a great deal of time here over the years as a result, and I've continued to be fascinated with Memphis.
Well, Lisa, let me move to you. Talking to you, talking about you with other people, a lot of people kind of come to the sense that your claim to fame was Family Gathering back in '88, which was Academy Award nominated. What brought you to this story? That's something completely different than, Family Gathering being about your Japanese heritage, but this one being about kind of this history of Memphis and focusing on Ernest Withers, a subject that was so prolific here.
Well, Phil brought me to this story. We've been long friends. Our paths have intersected over many decades now. And he talked about this fascinating person that I didn't know anything about. The word photography and history, and then the story about an FBI involvement was so intriguing that I jumped right in, and I thought, this is a story worth telling. And I also felt there was probably a really much deeper story here. And in terms of Memphis, Ernest Withers was Mr. Memphis. He was a griot to this community and a beloved figure. So it brought in not just Mr. Withers, but this amazing community that surrounded him and family. So they had all the right elements of a great story.
So for both of you, it's kind of like a bit of intrigue, like you with just Memphis in general being this subject that you've kind of brushed around for so long but never really dove into.
Right.
And then Lisa, it was you kind of, Phil telling you, about this subject and you kind of being interested in Ernest himself. What was the first step when you guys decided we're going to make a movie about this? Or how did you decide we're going to make a documentary about this,
So interestingly enough, it was a documentary that found me. It was started by my mentor, a documentarian named St. Clair Bourne, who, as it happens, died within 2 months to the day of Mr. Withers. And at that point, he had started a film on Ernest without anything related to his FBI involvement being known. He was making a film about a photographer who touched every seminal flashpoint of the civil rights movement, and that in and of itself is enough for a film. But the two men died within months of each other, and I inherited this film over the years to follow. And in that time, these revelations came out, and it was at that point that I knew there was a real controversial film to be made, and not soon after looked to my friend Lisa Yasui to help me do that. So that's really how we came to this story. It came to us, and we became the custodians of it. That's one of those providential good fortunes, you know.
So in a way, this film is kind of like carrying on a legacy of Sinclair as well.
In fact, the film is dedicated to his memory and legacy, and it'll be the last credit you see before we fade to black.
Wow. Well, let me ask you this. When the news broke that Ernest was an FBI informant by the commercial appeal of Mark Pereskia, what was the reaction, and how did that really change the story for you?
Well, the reaction in Memphis was outrage, to be quite honest with you, and I think that the reporter, Mark in this case, was wrongly accused of sensationalism, and the paper, the Commercial Appeal, which didn't have a great history with the black community in Memphis, was on its heels and made a really, I think, significant decision, which was to sue the FBI, or the Department of Justice in this case, to get them to confirm or deny the allegations that Mark was making in his expose, and they won that case, and that nothing short of a Davy and Goliath story, if you ask me. And in so doing, the FBI had to turn over files, unredacted files that had, Ernest's name and source symbol number to confirm their reporting, and it went on from there. Mark went on to publish a book based on that called Spy in Canaan. Another author, Preston Louderback, published a book called Bluff City, the interesting or extraordinary life, I think, of Ernest C. Withers. So in the time it took us to make this film, there were no less than 2 books, a picture book, a podcast. Am I missing anything? So to give you some idea of how long it takes to make a documentary, 2 books, no less than 3 were published in the time it took us to get here. So,
Well, let me ask you a little bit about Withers and his family. How did you go about telling the story in this way that uses his photos and those files and make that so intrinsic to the story, but also, as someone, I'm sure you've come across a lot of this when it comes to getting historical photos and videos and resources. It's not always the easiest thing to get those permissions and those rights. How did you do that and, be able to take Withers' work and really make it a central piece of the story in a way that anybody could go see it?
well, that's a tag team effort on our part. I mean, when I first came on to the project, the Withers family and collection, their cooperation was important, and we worked very hard to secure it. But over the course of 10 plus years, you've got to redouble your efforts, right, and maintain that trust. And we worked very hard to keep them abreast of what we were doing and how we were going about it, even if it would, maybe lead to some uncomfortable truths. And they were nothing short of courageous, in particular Roz Withers, who handles that collection and is carrying on the legacy of her father. But we couldn't have done it without the Withers family and that collection. And Lisa was the point person on the collection itself. It's just a treasure trove of photos.
And to that point, it is a story that initially feels very polarizing, but we resisted that. We knew that nothing is black and white. And when you come to a man who had a 60-year career, whose life intersected all these major historical events, he was everywhere. That there's a deeper story there. So we really resisted this idea of trying to, interview people who were for or against, but instead to ask them what they really knew about this man, to give him context, to also help people understand that he was a man of his time. And it's easy for us 50 years later to make judgments, but you have to walk in a person's shoes. And you also have to walk in the shoes of the interviewees to try to figure out where they're coming from and not just assume that you're either for or against. So that was a real effort on our part. And I think it also helped gain trust with the people we were interviewing, to let them know that we weren't going to just focus on the headline, but we were going to dig below the surface.
Right. I think, on first hearing that the picture taker, I think the first thought that comes to my mind is, oh, this is the Ernest Withers movie, right? And so I think there's two different opinions about that. When you come to the polarization, it's you either think this is going to be the tribute piece that's all good things about Ernest, or you think this is going to be, oh, we're going to go into the FBI informant and tell, how bad he really is, or something that's against him. And so when I first started watching it, I was thinking, there was so much positivity that came out of it. And I'm thinking, okay, this is more of that tribute movie. And then you hear someone like Rosetta Miller tell you how she felt about being informed on and those kind of negative consequences that came from those things. And I realized, you guys are really good about kind of keeping this middle line and just letting everybody hear, this is just how it is. We're not taking a side or an opinion on it. We're just saying, this is what he did. This is what happened. How did you decide to how did you go into structuring the movie and putting people putting certain voices when? There's kind of a chronological element to it, of course, starting out with Withers in high school, and then as he got older. But still, it's like you crafted when you wanted to hear from which person, and then again showing his pictures and kind of documenting. Even though he's documenting Memphis and events, it's also kind of documenting his life in the same way. How did you go about putting that together?
Yeah, that was our hope. That was our goal to, walk that line, knowing full well that, things are never black and white, that, to live in the gray area of life means to, get at the nuance and let people have and share their own perspective. And understanding that you, as an audience member, are going to have a perspective that you bring. And so we really felt it was important to kind of leave that open to the audience to decide, the veracity of what he did. Was it good? Was it bad? But the pictures do tell the story, as Ernest liked to say. And so we let them do that and carefully curated photos from his vast collection to help us do that. And Ernest was someone who never left the house without a camera. In fact, most of the time he had two around his neck. And so he was photographing Memphis civic life, political life, cultural and social life in and around Memphis. And so it wasn't that difficult to kind of get at all the various contours of the story because he had taken a photo that reflected it. And then the question becomes, well, what did he do with the photo? Did he sell it to the subject who was in the photo? Did he sell it to a publication like Jet or the Chicago Defender? Or did he furnish it to the FBI? And those are the kinds of questions that the audience has to ask of themselves, and we have people in the film to ask it as well. And we made a very strong point of only speaking to people that knew Mr. Withers, without maybe two exceptions in the film. Everyone you hear from knew the man and spent time with him, talked with him, had business with him. And so it was important for us to try to tell this story from the inside out. And so that was what we endeavored to do.
Can I speak to the editing question, though? Because, I had the privilege of going through thousands and thousands of photographs, as did Phil. I read as many FBI files as I could. We interviewed 50 people, I think, over the course of 6+ years. Wow. And then it all got dumped on Phil's lap, and he had the job of making it into a story. So I think a lot of history films like ours are made in the editing room. You collect as much information as you can from as many different sources, from as much visual variety as you can find to help animate it. Mm-hmm. And then you have to sit in the editing room, and I think you worked for over a year, 2 years, 3 years in some cases, doing cut after cut after cut, trying to weave this story together. So to your question of, how did you pull it all together? With great difficulty. And Phil gets all the credit, and our editors, Paula Aradia and Brian Cole just pulled off a miracle. It's a tough film. And then we have music as well. So, it's just got many, many, many layers.
Well, in gathering all those photos and video, which photos and video were you most excited about putting in the movie and showing people?
All of it. All of it. I mean, the photographs are just, it's a repository of history and of a people and of a culture and of times that just can't be found anywhere else. And to have the privilege of being allowed access to those materials by the Withers family, which again took a lot of courage and trust on their part to allow us that access. So the trying to make decisions about which of maybe 18,000 images we looked at out of 1.8 million that he left behind was no small task. And both of us probably have our favorites that ended up on the cutting room floor, but also the ones that you see in the film. There were about 350 that made it into the film. Those are the ones that we really feel helped move this story along.
Well, I'll say this, being born and raised here, there were certainly things about Memphis that I learned, just watching the movie. Are there any things that, new things about Memphis that you all learned from making this piece?
Well, I think one of the more surprising things that we learned about Memphis, I think when the allegations first emerged, Memphis was outraged. We expected to come to town, but then, this was proven as fact, so people had to have an opinion. And I think our expectation was that people would have, to the person, just felt betrayed by what Mr. Withers did, and that was just not the case. That Memphis was, still in his warm embrace, and that, the subjects that we spoke with, many of whom had been informed on and whose lives were impacted by that, refused to throw Mr. Withers under the bus. That there was this understanding of this town, this time, and that what Mr. Withers did had, was a little less clear cut than I think most people would expect. And I think the degree to which his legacy was still one that Memphis held in high esteem was probably the biggest surprise to me. And it said a lot about this town and its ability to understand the context in which Mr. Withers lived, and the man himself, and his ability to really touch lives. So that to me was a revelation.
One thing that really kind of hit home for me was it ends with his family talking about, no matter what anybody says, this was our father, grandfather, this is what we're going to believe in, this story we're going to stick with, and ending with Ernest saying, like, you know who you are, it doesn't matter what anybody else believes. What is your personal opinion about Ernest's body of work when it comes to everything that happened before he was an FBI informant and everything that happened after? Like, when everything was done on the cutting room floor and you hadn't made the documentary, or even while you were making it, what was your opinion about all of it?
Well, we're going to resist that question, is what we're going to do, because the point of the film, I think, is to help people engage in the story and to form their own opinion. And hopefully we left enough diverse paths in that storytelling that everybody's going to come away with a different take on it, depending on where they're coming from as an audience member. So, I keep on talking about the roads taken and the choices we make, and it's just not limited to the Withers story. It's to anybody who's living in a family or a community. You come to your opinions about somebody's actions based on your own. And we've seen reactions to this film all over the map, which pleases us because that's really what we had hoped for, that people at least are engaged in this story, and hopefully they're coming away with maybe more questions than answers. But I think that's what makes for a compelling documentary.
I will share this with you. Over the many years of living with this story and Mr. Withers haunting me, when are you going to finish this film, kid, kind of thing. There were days when I woke up loving him and just enchanted by his photographs, and then other days where I was angry with him for what he did. And so, but in the end, neither one of those extreme feelings overcame the other. I often found myself just confounded by the whole thing. And so I don't, as Lisa said, have a strong opinion one way or the other. I do, on any given day might change my mind, but I think that's the complexity of being human. That's the the beauty of humanity is that we're allowed to choose a path, and we choose one day and might choose one the next, and hopefully those paths, intersect and converge and accomplish what they set out to do. I'm not sure I'm making any sense, but it's a complex story.
No, it's just, putting in the context that we have, especially today with things, things like cancel culture, where it seems like it's very easy for, people on the internet to focus on pinpoint one mistake or one thing that people don't agree with and kind of take a person's entire legacy and just kind of flush it down the drain.
Yeah.
And so this film kind of resists that entirely. And, I go back to John B. Smith, that he said, before he was an informant, he did all these things and the body of work just kind of speaks for itself. Do you think that Ernest will ever be in a position where, people will just pinpoint the negative and end up, for lack of a better word, canceling him because of that?
I think that's a great comparison, this idea of cancel culture being something that could impact his legacy. I think this film will, resist that in such a way that, you couldn't cancel him if, now that this film's in the world, unless you want to, and so, yeah, I think it'll be very difficult to deny his legacy, given what we've shared in this story.
Well, this movie it's been through a festival run. It's currently still on its festival run, including Indie Memphis right here in the city, where the story is so integral. What kind of reactions and opinions have you all gotten as it's kind of shopped around the country? And have those opinions changed based on just what city you are, what part of the country you are, or what part of the world you're in?
Well, as I say, I think, how people see this film and interpret this story depends on where they've come from and what they're bringing to the screen just watching it. And I think we have to resist this idea that we are going to, reduce this guy to a label of hero or villain. You can be 5 things at once, never mind 2 things at once, and you can be 5 things at once at different junctures in your history, your personal history. And every audience member brings that same complexity to viewing this film. So we've seen reactions all over the place. And again, that's kind of delightful as a filmmaker, that you get that richness of response. So we've yet to show it at the time that we're taping this, to the larger Memphis community. So we'll see when we screen it. We're really looking forward to those conversations, though. And again, it's very gratifying as a filmmaker when you see a film that elicits conversation and resists the idea that you have to decide one way or the other how you feel about this man. And Ernest is the only person who knows why he did what he did when he did it. And we can't make that decision for him. He made his decisions based on his own history. So we are really trying to encourage people and maybe in some ways thinking, what would I have done if it's faced by similar circumstances?
There's a gentleman in the film, a Memphian, Kobe Smith, who was an invader, and he has a line at the end of the film which I think speaks to all of this, and he says, perspective is everything. Yeah. And Kobe's someone that, whose life was in jeopardy based on some of the informing that Mr. Withers did. So if he can have that notion, I'm sure the audience will as well.
Well, before we wrap, I do want to ask you this one question. The importance of just family in this movie, as well as just the overall community. But you said when you got into this project, the Withers family was one of the first, or the first people that you ended up, getting in contact with, if not just for the pictures, but for the story, And to end the movie on them and them talking about their father and them, in that, I don't know, was that like a family reunion or Thanksgiving or, and see what everyone's overall opinion is, and then to end that with Withers. How important was the subject and the perseverance of family through not just the documentary itself, but the process of making the documentary?
That's a great question, and that was something that I think we came upon over the years of making this film, was that this was a legacy story. This was a story about a man whose legacy was tarnished and in jeopardy of being canceled, as you point out. And so what does that mean? What impact does that have on the generations that follow? He had built this body of work that was uncontestable in terms of its scope and its depth about Black life during a period of time when few people were turning their lens on us. And they owned this collection, this remarkable collection that I had tapped for many of my films before. You know, I had a relationship with the collection because I was licensing those photos to tell the stories that I set out to tell. So it was invaluable to me. They've been approached often, you know, with great sums of money to, you know, let's make this part of the Getty archive or this archive or that archive. And you know, as Black people, generationally, we don't get to hold on to our heirlooms. And the degree to which this family has resisted that and told themselves that this is our cherished, you know, collection that we will control, I think is a really important story. And I admire Roz and the family for that endeavor, and I support them in that. And I think it was important for me anyway to let people know that this was a legacy that they've inherited, that their children of Ernest and Dorothy and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and so on, you know, can build on that legacy regardless of what the world has to say about Ernest C. Withers.
The two of you are currently on the film festival circuit, and we appreciate you taking out the time to come down here and visit us in Memphis, the place where the story is so integral because it happens here. Phil and Lisa, thank you so much for being here, and looking forward to seeing Picture Take Your Air nationally on PBS.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Caleb.